Yeah, and as we heard, some of his former staffers asking him to speak up and say something. Although the president did, he said to stay peaceful, but did not call them off. We have been following much of this along with Twitter, and so let's bring Rob Wu back in to show us some of the latest things that we're seeing. Every time you think you can't see a more stunning image, we see a more stunning image.
Yeah, Tim, I just wanted to pull up the picture that you just referenced from a reporter saying that a protester was in the chamber shouting, "Trump won that election." Here's that picture. See the man right there. I guess that's where the House Speaker typically would be. Got his fist up in the air. And what makes this especially eerie for me, Tim, is the words "E pluribus unum" right above him, as well as it looks like maybe a photographer on top capturing all of this happening. Another tweet from the same account showing some video. This is supposed to be, he says, this is people who got on a scaffolding outside the Senate. He says they took it to the second floor, which looks like the vicinity where Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's office is located. And he says they're starting to bang on the windows near his office, right there on the second floor. So you've got to wonder, where is Capitol Police to stop this sort of thing from going on? Because if they can bang on the window, I don't see why they can't break it and try to force their way inside. As we watch this video unfold a little more, they drop an American flag down. And it looks like it was just temporary. They lowered themselves back down. Wanted to show you two more pieces of video, Tim. This one right here, this account, you talked about the people breaching the Capitol, and maybe this is how they're getting inside. Windows of the Capitol being broken using, it looks like that might be the shield from some of the Capitol Police who are trying to keep them away. And then you see a piece of wood thrown like a spear at that window.
Yeah, they either brought their own shields or that, we did see them kind of,
And then I guess this video ends, Tim, or I think I accidentally paused it. And this is how I guess some of them are making their way inside the Capitol building.
I mean, this is not a movie. This is the Capitol building for the United States of America.
Dressed up in fatigues, too.
Wow.
It is just stunning. Hey, Rob, there's another interesting, we were talking about the fire extinguisher, at Stephen Nelson 10, and it's a V, not PH, in the Stephen. There was a reports of people that are being brought into Chuck Schumer's office, the minority leader in the Senate, although he might be majority leader here shortly, that they were coming in and they were covered in white substance, and people couldn't figure out why. And there was some theories that there was a fire extinguisher.
All right, Tim, I think I see what you're talking about. But before I pull up what you were talking about, some new pictures, this time from the Senate. Unbelievable. You see a man dressed up at the head of the table, three protesters. It looks like they're posing for pictures, maybe taking some video inside the U.S. Senate when they're supposed to be debating and certifying the Electoral College votes. That video you were talking about, Tim, about the fire extinguisher, I think you're probably
That's it right there.
Referencing that. Let me blow that up full screen. And it's hard to see anything. Okay, you do see a police officer inside, but it's not sure what he can do about it. They are far outnumbered, Tim, from all the videos that we see.
Well, and based on what I'm watching and seeing on Twitter from some of these national reporters is there is some question about the National Guard and whether requests have been denied and miscommunication about what's going on with that. And, look, these are hundreds, if not thousands of people. And I don't know how many Capitol Police members there are, but, they are far outnumbered. And so if they want to push through that, it seems like at this point they can, which brings me back to my original question of, this was not I'm sure that this was in the plans, that people knew that something like this could potentially happen, and what they would do with that. But here we are, what we're doing here, and Rob's showing us images of people on the dais of the U.S. Senate chamber, which it literally looks like a movie or a video game where someone overtakes the U.S. Capitol and they're just standing there. With those images, it's stunning. I feel like I'm saying that too often, but there's just no other way to describe that image that you are seeing on your screen right now, as the U.S. chamber has been, Senate chamber has been breached by protesters, and some of them appear to almost be bragging. As Rob and Mike were mentioning, they were taking pictures, standing up there, and one of them yelling that Donald Trump won the election. And I don't believe we've heard the president tweet any further. And let me see here. We're getting something from the National Guard site.
Okay, we do know that Representative Alma Adams is safe, which I think you mentioned before. I'm checking out, Tim, Leader McConnell's Twitter right now, and his last tweet came through about 52 minutes ago where, he was talking about the Electoral College, saying, quote, "I will vote to respect the American people's decision and defend our system of government." And then he gives looks like a link to his full remarks. But we haven't really heard anything from him yet either, or any of his staffers. So,
no. And one thing, by the way, we're talking about the National Guard here. One of our executive producers sent this to me, that the D.C. National Guard, which is really what we're talking about, is the only National Guard unit out of all the 54 states and territories which reports only to the president. And so this is from the National Guard site. And there are reports from some national reporters that the Defense Department denied the request to utilize that National Guard. Now, again, this is reporting that we're getting, so we don't know 100%. And another image of a Confederate flag flying outside of the U.S. Senate chamber in the nation's capital at this hour as we continue to watch that. Rob, you got something else for us?
Just scrolling through right now, Tim, as I just seeing a lot more pictures of just protesters being inside the building, Tim. Something I guess I could pull up again just to show you again the tense situation inside the House chamber with the guns drawn. Now, with their guns drawn, I'm kind of wondering how they got inside, because obviously you have 1, 2, looks like at least 3 people armed trying to keep the people out, but maybe perhaps they noticed there were so many people outside it was best for them to just fall back, perhaps, Tim. I'm not sure. Yeah, it is. It's difficult to, especially in this chaos of this and these pictures, to know who is who and what is going on. There is also video that MSNBC just posted of someone being wheeled out of the U.S. Capitol that was essentially covered in blood. And it's hard to tell. They're on a stretcher. It is difficult to tell, and it appears that they're administering CPR to this person as they walk by. It does not look like they're uniformed, but it did appear that there was CPR being administered to that individual who was on a gurney or a stretcher heading out of the U.S. Capitol. So clearly, not only we saw that police officer or law enforcement officer walking by was holding his head, he had been hurt, but clearly we have now some serious injuries taking place. We do have reports as well as when U.S. House members and Senate members were leaving the U.S. Capitol, they were being given gas masks. As we told you, there were reports of tear gas being administered inside the U.S. chamber. And again, I can tell you this from the protests were happening here in North Carolina this summer. Those were outside, and that tear gas just lingers in the air, and you get even a tiny bit of it inside your eyes, your nose, your mouth. It is almost unbearable. So it's unimaginable what it must be like inside the hallways of the U.S. chamber, particularly in some of those areas that can be very tight and narrow, or some of those hallways that are going on as well. And, Mike, you have to wonder what, you mentioned the curfew that's being put in place. It's a city curfew. But these folks aren't listening to anything, obviously, that's been happening, as what we're seeing here, whether that will be effective. And frankly, the town's been shut down because of COVID. So, they're going to have to remove these folks. I don't think a curfew is going to have any impact. You know what? And Tim, you bring up an excellent point. I mean, who even knows whether these folks know that there will be a curfew at 6 p.m. in D.C.? Whether they're monitoring social media, they're probably not. I mean, you can see some folks who are taking pictures and video for Instagram because they were holding up their cameras, or maybe it was just for this moment. But it just looks like, plenty of federal laws have been broken. But I guess police at one point. Tim, go over to you. Yeah, thanks, Mike. We on the phone right now, we have Congresswoman Alma Adams. We mentioned that she had tweeted just a short while ago that she was safe. Congresswoman, first of all, I don't want you to give away your location, but please tell us how you are doing and what the situation feels like for you being there. Oh, we apparently don't have the Congresswoman on the phone at this moment. Congressman, can you hear me? Okay. We were trying to talk to her because obviously she tweeted a little earlier that she was okay
But obviously, it is a dangerous situation at the U.S. Capitol at this hour as House members and Senate members have been evacuated from the building or are in the process of being evacuated. They were in that chamber trying to do that. Congressman Adams, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. How are you, Tim?
I am doing as well as can be expected, I guess. And I should ask you the same question. You are in the midst of this in Washington, D.C. Tell us about the situation that you've been through.
Well, it's very tense, and I will say I'm not an emotional person, but this is a very emotional moment. This should have been a very sacred time for us to go in and do what we needed to do, and to be disrupted in the way that this process has is a terrible, terrible thing. But I'm safe. And I don't know how else to, and I'm embarrassed, really. I'm embarrassed for our country. And I just think the president ought to be ashamed of himself.
Were you ever inside the Capitol building when any of this was going on?
I was in the Capitol earlier, and I was diverted from the Capitol because right as soon as I got there, we had specific times that we could actually go in and observe. And just as it was my time, a few minutes before my time to go into the building, we were trying to get in the building. They actually put the building on lockdown because protesters had stormed the barricades and had knocked the barricades down, climbed the wall. And so I just came back on the other side to another office building and tried to watch the proceedings from the TV screens. So I didn't go back. I was waiting to go back for the vote, and of course we didn't get that far, as you can see. And it's just a horrible, horrible day for our democracy.
I mean, I can't put this any more bluntly. Has it been scary?
Absolutely. Because we get these warnings, and this was my first time seeing them like that, coming on your computer, and then the buzzers in your office going off, and so forth. And so, yeah, it was very scary, especially when I hear that there are weapons out here, and then the police, our Capitol Police, had weapons drawn inside the chamber. This is supposed to be a sacred hall of Congress and of the U.S. House, and for me, it's a very emotional moment. Now, I knew, or we had heard, that there was going to be some objection to the elections. And, of course, we expected that, but we certainly did not expect this.
Congresswoman, do you think that the President of the United States could do something at this point to stop this?
Oh, I think he can do something, and I am convinced that he should do something. He has created a disruptive nation here. He's edged these folks on. He continues to do it, and as I said before, he ought to be ashamed of himself. It is, to me, it is a gross violation on the rights of our communities across.
Good evening. Coming up on a special edition of Capitol Tonight, chaos at the U.S. Capitol as supporters of President Donald Trump swarmed the legislative citadel. Inside, members of Congress debating the winner of the presidential race, hunkering down as protesters storm the hallowed halls. Meanwhile, calls for calm from the president and president-elect.
Demand an end to this siege.
But you have to go home now. We have to have peace.
An historic day for our democracy. We'll have coverage from Washington and perspective from our political observers and insiders. All on a special edition of Capitol Tonight, starting right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us here on Spectrum News 1. I'm Tim Boehm. Hope you and your family are safe and well tonight. Boy, an unprecedented day in the nation's capital. What was supposed to be a ceremonial function of our democracy devolved into chaos at the U.S. Capitol. Supporters of President Donald Trump stormed the halls in protest, demanding for the Electoral College votes for President Joe Biden, or President-elect Joe Biden, to be overturned, and President Trump allowed to serve a second term. Let's go ahead and first and foremost bring in our Washington Bureau reporter Kevin Fry, who is in the midst of the situation on the ground for part of today. So Kevin, the big broad question, what was it like?
Well, I mean, we were already preparing here in D.C. for this to be a long, rather dramatic day. We knew there would be the protest over by the White House, that the president would be speaking. And then we also knew that, of course, the Electoral College vote was going to be probably drawn out for a very long period of time because of those various objections. However, this day took a rather dramatic turn. It happened right around the time that the electoral vote counting process was actually starting on the House floor itself, when they were starting to open those ballots. And that's when we got word that at least one building in the Capitol complex was starting to be evacuated. Within short order, another reporter and I started kind of wandering around the other House office building that I was sitting in, that I was doing some work in. And so things were peaceful there. We then went outside, and that is when we were able to see the chaos that was really ensuing on the Capitol Hill and the Capitol grounds. You saw people up on the presidential inauguration stand, protesters there. You saw protesters all the way up to the top of the Capitol steps on the other side of the Capitol building. And then the word came that people had gotten inside, that people were on the Senate floor, that there was some sort of spray inside the Capitol building itself. Extraordinary images playing out today. This is the Capitol building. This is one of the most secure buildings in the country, certainly within Washington, D.C., perhaps second only to the White House itself. The fact that this was penetrated, the fact that people got inside, ran around, is just an extraordinary occurrence. So now our understanding, at least as of this hour, Tim, is that, one, there is now a curfew in place here in Washington. They have been cleared off of the Capitol. They are going through the process of clearing out the Capitol building itself, though there is a degree of lockdown still on Capitol Hill. Around the same time that all this was playing out, the reason I'm here in our newsroom, in our flash studio, is because I couldn't get back into the Capitol complex. They were barring the doors, essentially, to the public today as a result of all of this playing out. But just an extraordinary circumstance, certainly something I've never seen, and I don't think we've seen much of anything of this in history to compare it to, Tim.
No, I said you couldn't stage photos that would be more dramatic for a movie than what we have seen come out of our nation's capital today. So in some ways it started earlier in the day when the president talked to the rally of supporters calling for the vote to be overturned, but he changed course, sort of?
Well, kind of. He basically said, he released this video statement at one point this afternoon saying, look, go home. These protesters go home. But at the same time, he reiterated his complaint that this was a stolen election, which is unfounded. His campaign has had dozens of court cases. They've yet to been able to back up these claims of ballot fraud or issues with that. And so while at the same time he may have been suggesting people go home, he's adding fuel to the fire, to the very fire that seems to have led to where we were today. Take a listen to some of what he said.
There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil.
Interestingly, we just got a statement recently from Senator Richard Burr, who is, of course, a Republican, who has said that he was not planning to object to the Electoral College voting process today. But in that statement, he takes Trump to task, saying the president bears responsibility for today's events by promoting the unfounded conspiracy theories that have led to this point. It is past time to accept the will of the American voters and to allow our nation to move forward, Tim.
Fair to say that's probably the most pointed criticism of the president that we've ever heard from Senator Richard Burr in 5 years.
Indeed.
All right, so
fair, completely fair, yes.
So President-elect Biden calling for calm and for President Trump to speak out as well this afternoon, right?
Right, so we did hear from Joe Biden and talk about a study in contrast here in terms of his remarks, basically saying to President Trump, step up to the plate, get on board and calm these people down. He had stunning words about all of this, saying that this is chaos, that it borders on sedition. Take a listen to some more of what he said.
Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition, and it must end.
Now, interestingly, in just that clip that you just heard, he talks about this being a small pocket of people. Joe Biden, throughout his campaign, has made this all about promoting the soul of the nation, of preserving the country. That was basically why he got into this race, he says, from the very beginning. And so now he's going to be inheriting this situation. Whether he thinks it's a small group or not, the dramatic displays here in Washington certainly underline a divided country, as seen in a divided Senate and a very slim majority for the Democrats in the House, Tim. One other note about this whole process, obviously it's 2 weeks from today that Joe Biden is going to be sworn in. Our understanding from the Democratic leaders in the House is they want to move forward with starting to count those Electoral College votes tonight.
Yeah, as early as 8 o'clock we hear, so we'll be following that as we continue to look live in Washington, D.C. Our Kevin Fry, thank you so much. By the way, Twitter tweeted that as a result of unprecedented ongoing violence situation in D.C., they've required the removal of 3 Donald Trump tweets that were posted earlier today for repeated and severe violations of our civic integrity policy. If he does that, he will get back on Twitter in 12 hours. So something to follow. Throughout the day, we've been hearing from North Carolina lawmakers reacting to the protest on Capitol Hill, many of them there in Washington, obviously. For more on that, let's bring in our senior political reporter, Rtdna. And so, Loretta, what are we hearing from our North Carolina lawmakers tonight?
Well, Tim, we've heard from most of the state's congressional delegations saying that they're safe and well, but many of them are tweeting from secure locations in and around Capitol Hill. On the House side, Congressman Greg Murphy denounced the violence today, saying, "Let me first and foremost, in the strongest possible way, condemn the anarchy and violence that has beset our Capitol today. As I have said many times, peaceful protests are one of the most meaningful foundations of our democracy. That meaningful dialogue has now been destroyed and marred by this of violence. This is not how America operates. I am ashamed of this horrible behavior." Over on the U.S. Senate side, Senator Tom Tillis tweeted this: "I proudly back the blue and support law and order, which is why I condemned the violence that took place in cities across the nation this summer. It's a national disgrace to have a mob attacking Capitol Police and engaging in anarchy. This is not what America stands for." We also talked with Congresswoman Alma Adams earlier in the day. Here's a little bit of what she had to say.
I will say I'm not an emotional person, but this is a very emotional moment. This should have been a very sacred time for us to go in and do what we needed to do, and to be disrupted in the way that this process has. It's a terrible, terrible thing.
Now, of course, all of this was happening as Congress was debating objections to the Electoral College votes from the state of Arizona. Earlier this evening, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that Congress would continue its deliberations this evening.
Yeah, and as early as 8 o'clock, so that's going to be something to watch closely, Loretta. All right, we'll see you here in a few minutes back on the show. When we return, we'll talk with a member of Congress who is on Capitol Hill amid the chaos. A little later, we'll bring in a panel of political observers and insiders for some perspective on the day's events, what it means moving forward. Capitol Tonight continues right after this short break.
This is when they're becoming adults and starting to really learn to think for themselves. So as somebody who is working with that age, I'll call them kids, but young adults, how do you now approach something like this in the classroom?
Well, you approach it structurally and institutionally and within the context of history. My twin daughters are 21 years old, so they are the same age as well. And so again, my daughters were 2 years old and at September 11th. So, they just needed to feel safe and didn't need to really know what was going on. As Tricia said, it's important for, her kids to know they were safe. For my kids, meaning my actual children and my students at the university, they need to understand, how this fits into our institution, why it was, and I'll use the word again, unprecedented, what it means going forward, and where it sits in the context of history. And it is extremely uncommon in modern times. We are very polarized in this country, but there's two types of polarization: ideological, where you have very far apart beliefs, and affective, where you actually hate each other. Our ideological polarization has increased over the past 20 years, but not by as much as people think. However, our affective polarization has gotten wider than ever. The two far sides of the left and the right literally hate each other and believe the other side is Satan. There was a sign on the truck that was parked in front of the Capitol today that actually said, "Pelosi is Satan." So, that affective polarization is driving this, and I will put that in context for my students, as I teach American government.
Susan, today we've heard so many people condemning what we saw happening today in the nation's capital. How important is it for the society as general, for the students that you're working with, to understand condemning this is not saying that we don't support protesting and making your voices heard in this country?
Sure. And I think, you look at all the theories and the literature about social movements. I think it's unfortunate that there's one thing in political science, and I will say this to my students in the presidency. Richard Neustadt said it. He said, the power of the presidency is the power to persuade. And Donald Trump has persuaded a certain niche of people that this is the way to act and this is the thing to do. I was also struck today by the arrogance of the protesters. And so I'll explain it to my students in saying, this was an aberration. This was not protest. This was something much more destructive. And I think we'll see tonight what happens. And I think the members of Congress and Senate are coming back tonight. Are these objections still going to be as vigorous as they started out? I wasn't watching television. I watched Mitch McConnell, very good. And I saw, well, let me see Chuck Schumer. And then everything blew up, and I sat by the television for 4 hours. And so I think I'll explain it to them in terms of, this is a pivotal event. Look at impeachment, look at these things, and you should write down in a journal somewhere, where was I when this happened, and how did I first learn about it? That's what I'm telling them to do.
Tricia, you brought up that time at the legislature where people got into the side doors at the legislature. What was it like being somebody who was sitting on that floor then having to get back to business that day?
Well, it was the back gold doors that were the ones that were actually opened by 3 individuals. Speaker Tillis was presiding over the chamber. It was a late afternoon, and my desk was in the very back of the chamber, very close to those gold doors, which are now locked during session, but at that time they were not. And 3 individuals bombarded and started screaming and pointing their fingers at Speaker Tillis and others. And I remember just sitting there in total, just what is happening? Who are these people? And you automatically think, am I safe? Am I going to get to go home to Charlotte and see my child? My seatmate was a former police officer, and he put his arms over me and took me out the side door. There was just great pandemonium. And, it's one of those days I will never forget as a legislator, and certainly won't forget either. That was a very bad day. And so my heart does go out to all lawmakers who are experiencing this. And let's also not forget our Senate interns, our Capitol Hill interns, our college students who are there, who are experiencing this and the trauma that they've endured today. It's a very, very sad and hard day.
It's a very true statement to remember all of those staff members that were up there today. We're going to leave it with that for tonight on Capitol Tonight. I want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight and helping us work through what we saw happening today in our nation's capital. That is it for now. Stay tuned to Spectrum News Network's news special that is coming up after the break. I'm Rtdna. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here on Capitol Tonight tomorrow evening.